we pray to Ma as ChandraGhanta to inspire these qualities also in us, to augment our abilities and steel our hearts, especially in dark places or when beset by foes, to enable us to support those who need it, just as Ma did with her own parents, itself the supreme act of piety per Ganesha and Skanda's parable of the race around the world. And to illuminate the truth, sharpen our own minds to properly discern it, and appropriately arm us to cut through with our wits both illusions and adversaries, to slay both the literal and metaphorical demons which beset us, therefore removing obstacles in our way, or showing us the proper pathway through, over, or around them, or, for that matter, how they are not so much obstacles at all, but rather building blocks and stepping stones to greater ascent in our journeys, to empower us with piety in our hearts and in our actions, to enhance our earthly senses of sight and smell, and touch and taste and hearing, etc., as well as our inner senses, including those of righteousness, foresight, and the perception beyond the material, and of that which is hidden from us, and those of mind, and to lift the tide in the affairs of men, to quote me some Shakespeare, the play Julius Caesar in fact, just as the moon's gravitational attraction raises the waters in the oceans, and therefore our boats upon them. The lesson of ChandraGhanta for the devotee, then, is an incredibly multifaceted one. There are many parts to it, and I could pen an entire article, or perhaps even a series of articles upon them. But at their core they are all one: the vital importance of seeing things truly, and then acting upon what has been thusly discerned. This is the unifying thread of all of it, indeed in a very real way, of life itself and the entire spans of both mortal and immortal existence. For just as ChandraGhanta was able to dispel the fear of her parents with the illuminating radiance of her light, which showed things as they actually were, and thusly allowed the marriage of Parvati and Shiva to actually take place, so too was this marriage only to eventuate as the result of Lord Shiva seeing Parvati then as Brahmacharini, for who and what she actually, in truth, indeed is truth, actually is. And that itself was only able to take place as a result of Parvati, once reborn, becoming aware of her own nature, and seeking out her destiny with utmost focus and resolve. When demons are confronted, ChandraGhanta's example is relevant for two reasons. First, as it reminds us to look for things as they actually are. The oft somewhat hidden, or otherwise not immediately apparent, weaknesses of the adversaries, especially those which they are not aware of, or have almost deliberately sought to overlook in themselves. Consider Mahishasura with his overweening pride, thinking that he was invincible, and perhaps forgetting that his boon of conditional invulnerability had not included woman, at precisely the point that a supremely well-armed, and then further enraged war goddess took to the field against him. And second, because, to reference Chesterton, because she reminds us that such demons are not all-conquering, are never all-powerful, and that even amidst the sea of night, they can be found and expurgated most gorily. I am indulging in a bilingual pun. Gora as in terrifying, but also Gaura, Gauri as in white and pale, like the moonlight, and it even means beauty. And that really does matter a great deal. The dispelling of fear is no small thing, of vital importance for the warrior, or even for the ordinary person. An anxiety disorder, as it turns out, is often significantly a fear of fear, an anxiety about anxiety, manifesting, which in turn turns into a cascade and physiological response. It is not quite the case that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It is rational, when confronted with supernatural, or even supernormal, terrors of this world or another, to experience such an emotion. They may, after all, kill you, and eat you, or worse, if you're lucky, in that order. But the removal of fear, that most paralyzing and suffocating of emotions, is a grand start towards being able to more properly assess the situation. See? The power of discernment, perspicacity, wisdom, once, thrice more, and thence to formulate the more proper and appropriate response, which may, to be sure, entail a tactical retreat, which will generally be more successful than an out-and-out rout, that is, the comparable fear-infused parallel reaction. Or it may mean noting that the Hydra's heads aren't growing back where they've caught on fire, for instance, and applying fire pure, a Proto-Indo-European pleonistic pun there, as a problem-solving tool, which is likely to be much more effective than just hacking at the beast blindly and hoping for the best. To return to that Chesterton allusion, allow me to quote the paragraph whence it comes from in full, because I do think it's quite evocative and quite useful here. Fairy tales, then, are not responsible for producing in children fear or any of the shapes of fear. Fairy tales do not give the child the idea of the ugly or the evil. That is in the child already, because it is in the world already. Fairy tales do not give the child his first idea of the bogey. What fairy tales give the child is his first clear idea of the possible defeat of the bogey. The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon. Exactly what the fairy tale does is this. It accustoms him for a series of clear pictures to the idea that these limitless terrors had a limit, that these shapeless enemies have enemies in the Knights of God, that there is something in the universe more mystical than darkness and stronger than strong fear. This also harkens back around to a principle of combat theology, which directly explains part of the mechanism via which prayer and piety can be so baneful to the demonic. Because, in a miniature act of Eliadian eternal return, the repetition of such stories in the properly resonant manner, i.e. when believed in, and with the appropriate instruments of recall, these serve as a reminder, not just to us, that the demons in question can be slain, but to the demons themselves, of a time when they, or more likely, the far greater, even greatest amidst their number, were hurt really, really badly. So you might say, it is a situation of showing the demons what's actually there as well. And there are few things which can inspire a rather immediate volte-face and a reconsidering your presence in a given area than a confrontation with the realities of your own potentially imminent mortality. Pain, too, can be a teacher, even if the beatings must continue until the comprehension before beatings improves. Yet I digress, albeit rather importantly. To return more directly to this thread, then, the lesson of ChandraGhanta for the devotee, we can see this core theme expressed also in something which she shares with her counterpart, coming from the other end of the Navratri cycle, Kalratri. I say counterpart, as both are the third manifestation from the start or end point in question, and both are rather strongly, indeed quite directly, in the name in the case of the latter, linked to the night sky, which is dark, but therefore also enables points of light which would otherwise be invisible to shine forth. Not just the moon, but the stars, the planets, the constellations, and thence astrology and much beauty for our world. There are secrets that cannot be understood in daylight, and some lights shine vastly more brighter when couched amidst such veiling. Some delusions and illusions are only possible in daylight, and some truths attain their higher saliency and relevancy solely amidst the dark. So in terms of the core lesson of ChandraGhanta then, while some wisdom is inherent and innate, and other wisdom is imparted through hard-won experience, either your own, or that of somebody you are learning directly from, in order to avoid making the same mistakes which they did the first time around, it is important to consider the messages which are inherent in that divine theonym of hers, so incredibly, lambently, illustratively illuminative. If in doubt, look up. It's where the moon is, especially amidst dark places. And just like the moon, the luminacy, not necessarily to be mistaken for the lunacy, although, as in an age of darkness a blind man is reputed to be a useful guide, so too in an age of madness. But perhaps more in the Avadhuta tradition some other time, perhaps. But if the luminacy is not immediately apparent, or seemingly departed, just as the moon, it shall cyclically come back around again. Further, listen, and be receptive to the guidance that you are being shown. This is partially, as I have alluded to above, why prayer, myth, and heritage more generally are such potent weapons, as can also be demonstrated when we consider just who and what it is that generally wishes to erase these things, and lock them far away so as to prevent their ongoing employment and transition, by which I was referring to the demon Durga, of course. Because they contain all these pearls of luminary symbolism, of wisdom, if you know where and how to look for them there, which is something else that having a priest caste is rather useful for, both providing the guidance themselves, and or assisting others to learn to discern such things where appropriate as well. Continuing the sonorous theme, speak, resound, like the bell, which we both hear, as noted above, but which also radiates out, much like the light from a source of illumination, and recall also that fire, Agni, can be holy, thus making its emanation and diffusion outwards, which reveals to the world wards against the impious likewise, when we should happen to ring it. The bell, that is. The reason I mention this is, in part, due to how that moonlight is ultimately derived. It is the reflected light of the sun, whom we shall be meeting in the next night's piece, Ma as Kushmanda, the power of the sun. Yet found where the sun is not, or at least is not to be seen directly for the most part. So therefore, just as the moon transmits the sun's light out into the darkness, where it is most needed, via virtue of its absence, so too is the lesson of ChandraGhanta, that one should see where there is a lack of wisdom and or a necessity of action, even protective force, and move to project into that space what is needed there. Illuminate somebody's night by passing along wisdom, knowledge, and insight. In other words, dispel their fear via your presence. Show that what is actually there is not an uncaring void between men, but rather living bonds of fidelity and heritage and faith. Become the moonlight. And remember always, should you go wandering beneath the august Chandra radiance, that bravery will take you into the most dangerous of places, overwhelming firepower will see you safely through them. As this too is another facet of the lesson of ChandraGhanta. Discern what is actually there, which includes risk, peril. Be equipped for the situations you might encounter while so going, and know how to make good use of those tools or other elements you have been given. And above all, know that the light of ChandraGhanta signifies one further element, that the eye of the divine is rarely closed fully, and often to be found somewhere overhead, even if it might not have made itself immediately visually apparent. The true seeing of Parvati enabled her to undertake extraordinary efforts in order to attain something which would be seemingly impossible. That is the lesson of Brahmacharini, guiding her from, perhaps unexpected, deliberate beginnings along a track of her own overwhelming willpower, the lesson of Shailaputri, to a longed-for beneficent attainment, a prize won, in no small part, because the eye of the divine, in fact the very same one that had earlier burned Kama to ashes, was also watching, and saw truly what was within her, and demonstrated inarguably via her deeds, understandings, and conduct, the lesson of ChandraGhanta going the other way. We also honour Ma as ChandraGhanta this night for other reasons, not least of which is, surely, the fact that it is as this aspect that Parvati successfully attains her hugely significant goal of reunification with Mahadev, an act of incredible importance both for its setting the universe back into balance. I also note that Mahadeva recreates Kamadeva with a glance in some tellings following this happy occasion. Love literally re-enters the world. But also as the enthusiastic and empathic, in some measure as we are capable, the joy which we must surely feel for both Lord Shiva and Lady Parvati in their happiness at having once again found each other, even despite the greatest of possible barriers to be found this side of the end of the universe, which they shall also overcome. And of course for her emblematic ability as the vanquisher of demons, piety, prowess, and perspicacity. Power, Parvati, Ma as ChandraGhanta.